There's a thing that happens to sleep somewhere in your 50s that nobody sits you down and explains. The hours do not necessarily change. You can be in bed the same length of time you always were and get up feeling like you borrowed the night rather than owned it. For a long stretch, I assumed I was doing something wrong at bedtime, so I fixed bedtime. Earlier bedtime, darker room, no radio, no reading. None of it made any difference at all. It turns out I was working on the wrong end of the day. The reason deep sleep gets harder as we get older is not really about the night. And once somebody explained that to me properly, 3 things I had been doing wrong stopped looking like 3 separate problems. No miracle cures, no scare stories, nothing to buy, just what's actually true. I have 3 changes. They cost nothing, and I have been doing all 3 for long enough now to tell you honestly which ones did the work. The one at number 1 is something I do before I have even got out of bed, and it is the one I would keep if I had to give up the other 2. That comes last. Maybe you have noticed that you wake at 4 and lie there with a mind that is perfectly happy to be awake. Maybe you get your full 8 hours and still feel like the sleep was thin, like weak tea. Maybe the naps arrived without you deciding anything about naps. That last one arrived for me first, and I spent a good while treating it as a character flaw. I thought that was just age. It wasn't. First, the reason. What is actually happening in plain words? Here is the part that reframed everything. Sleep is not one thing. There is a deep stretch, the heavy part, the part that does the repairing and leaves you feeling like the night meant something. As we get older, that stretch gets shorter and it breaks up more easily. That is real. It happens to nearly everybody, and no video is handing it back to you. But that is half of it, and the other half I could do something about. The body runs on a daily clock, and it does not keep its own time perfectly. It gets reset every day by signals, and the main one is light. What changes with age is that the clock goes hard of hearing. So a day strong enough to set it at 40 is not strong enough at 60. And if the clock is set weekly, the night comes out weak. I had been standing at the wrong end of the day, turning the volume down on the radio, when the problem was that the message had been sent 12 hours earlier and had arrived as a whisper. Everything below is about sending it louder. Number 3, the first hour, and the thing I was doing indoors. For years my morning went like this. Kettle on, curtains open about halfway, radio. Then I sat at the table with the light behind me until about 9:30. It felt like a bright enough room. What I did not know is that a room that feels bright to us is not remotely the same signal as being outside. Even outside under cloud, even outside in a gray February. The gap between the two is enormous, and my eyes had no idea because eyes are not built to measure it. So the signal that was supposed to start my clock every morning had been arriving faint for about a decade. What I do now costs nothing and takes about 10 minutes. I take the first cup of tea outside, or if it is properly foul, I stand at the open back door with it. That is the whole of it. I did not manage every morning, and I want to say that plainly. 4 mornings out of 7 was where I landed, and 4 out of 7 turned out to be enough to notice something. If getting outside is not straightforward on a given morning, sitting by the brightest window you have, facing it rather than beside it, does a reduced version of the same job. It is not equal, and it is still a great deal better than the back of the room, which is where I spent my decade. What I noticed first was not at night. It was that the middle of the morning stopped feeling like something I had to push my way into. The night part came later, and it came quietly. Number 2, not whether you nap, but where the nap sits. I want to be careful with this one, because I am not here to take your nap away. I fell asleep in the chair most afternoons for about 2 years, and I treated it as evidence that I was going downhill, and I was wrong about that. And if you are doing it, you are not failing at anything. What I got wrong was not the napping, it was the time. Mine had drifted to 4:30 or 5, and it drifted there because that was when I felt worst, which is exactly the logic that gets you into trouble. The way it was explained to me is that across a day you build up a kind of pressure to sleep, and it builds from the moment you wake. A nap spends some of that pressure. Spend it at 1 o'clock, and there are hours left to build it back before bed. Spend it at 5, and you arrive at 11 with the tank half empty. Get into bed, and lie there being reasonable with yourself. So I moved it earlier and I made it shorter, and I stopped apologizing for it. Early afternoon, 20 minutes or so. in the chair, and I set a timer because left alone, I will sleep for an hour and a half and wake up in a fog that takes the rest of the day. If you cannot move it, moving it by an hour is worth more than doing nothing. And if you are somebody who cannot nap at all, that is fine too. And this one is simply not yours. It took about 3 weeks before the evenings changed. And what changed was not that I fell asleep faster. It was that I stopped lying there doing arithmetic about how much of the night was left. Number 1, the same wake time, including the days it makes no sense. Here is the one I would keep. I get up at the same time every day, and I mean every day, including Sunday, including the mornings after a bad night, and especially the mornings after a bad night. That last part is the whole of it, and it is also the part that sounds most like nonsense when you are lying there at 7, having slept badly and knowing perfectly well that another hour is available. I took that hour for about 15 years. It felt like repair, and it was nothing of the kind. If I get up at 7 on a good day and 8:30 after a rough one, I have not given myself a lie in. I have moved the one signal my body was still receiving clearly, and I have moved it on precisely the day it was already confused. So the next night is worse, and then I need another lie in, and around it goes, and I ran that circle for years, while telling anyone who asked that my sleep was simply bad now. It was not simply bad. It was being contradicted every few days by me. When I changed it, I did not start with the alarm. I started by writing down, for a fortnight, what time I actually got up, because I did not know. The spread was over 2 hours, which was the moment it stopped being an argument. Then I picked a time I could hold on the worst day, not the best one, which meant it was later than I wanted it to be. If getting up at a fixed time is difficult because of pain or stiffness in the mornings, sitting up with the light on for a few minutes before you go anywhere is doing something, and that counts. Hold one time for a fortnight before you touch anything else. And here is the honest bit about the bad nights, because this is where I nearly quit. For the first 10 days or so, I was more tired, not less, because I was no longer topping up in the mornings, and the debt had nowhere to hide. The tiredness lifts around the second week. If it is still worsening after a month, that is your signal to stop and speak to someone rather than to grind on. Mine lifted, and the first thing that came back was not sleep. It was that I stopped waking at 4 with a busy head, which I had never once connected to what time I was getting up. What I would actually do first. If you only take one thing, take the wake time and take it on its own. Do not do all 3 this week, because doing all 3 this week is how you find out nothing about any of them. Hold one wake time for a fortnight, then add the first hour of light on top of it, then look at where the nap sits, and give the whole thing about 6 weeks before you decide whether it did anything. 6 weeks sounds slow, and it is slow, and it is still faster than the 15 years I spent fixing bedtime. The honest part. What these did not do, I said at the start that I would tell you which ones did the work. So here it is. The wake time did most of it, the light did a real and smaller amount, and the nap timing did the least of the 3, though it did the most for how the evenings felt. Nothing here gave me back the sleep I had at 30. That deep stretch is genuinely shorter than it was, and it is going to stay shorter, and part of what I was calling a problem was a body that has done 60-odd years of work and is entitled to sleep differently now. And if that is what is going on with you, that is allowed. I still have a bad night most weeks. The difference is that a bad night is now a bad night rather than the beginning of a bad fortnight. There is nothing to buy here, and I would be careful with anyone selling you something for sleep, because all 3 of these are free and slightly boring, which is not a product. And there is one thing I cannot see from here. If you are waking up unrefreshed, no matter what you do, or if somebody has told you that you stop breathing in the night, or if the tiredness is new and arrived quickly, that is a conversation for your own doctor and not for a video. And it is worth having rather than putting off. That is the one situation where everything I have just said would be the wrong place to start. If there is something you want explained plainly, put it in the comments. I read every single one. A like on this one helps it reach other people our age who have been fixing bedtime for years, which is the whole of what we do here. I spent 15 years working on the last hour of the day. The answer was in the first one. Here is to the healthy living years.